We were both teenagers, so I met him in Melbourne. Our social lives revolved around drinking in hotels pretty much. He was never able to sustain any long-term sobriety. He went to AA a few times, but he was never able to. The disease just continued to progress in him.
Hello and welcome to Wellbeing. I'm Jack Hodgins. Today I'll be discussing the experiences of being close to someone with an alcohol use disorder. We are joined by Elizabeth, who has been the partner of someone affected by an alcohol use disorder. She is here today to share her perspective and to shed some light into her world. Hello Elizabeth, and welcome to the program.
Hi Jack.
Before we begin, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself, Elizabeth?
I lived for a number of years in Melbourne, was married there and had 2 children there. And I originally went to Melbourne to train as a nurse at the Royal Melbourne Hospital. So ended up staying there for a few years. And then my parents moved from their home in Albury and came up here to Port Macquarie. So this is where I ended up living. We followed them up here. So I've just been working. I'm retired now. I've been retired for a couple of years, but been working all the time as a nurse in various places and bringing up a family and yeah.
When did you start to notice that alcohol was becoming a problem for the person close to you?
So I met, it's my husband who was the original person with the problem, and I met him. We were both teenagers, so I met him in Melbourne, and wasn't really obvious then because all of us, our social lives revolved around drinking in hotels pretty much. So there wasn't really any distinction between him or anybody else at that point. And then we got married and I knew that his father had an alcohol problem, and we got married, and then it became more evident that he had a problem with alcohol. So he chose to spend time drinking in hotels. When the children were born, he wasn't around very much. He was out drinking, and coming home, he could be quite abusive and violent. And I tried to stop him from doing that, which was not successful.
What became harder for you in daily life? Like, was it always on your mind kind of thing?
Pretty much, yes. I was pretty much focused and possibly even obsessed with trying to figure out how to stop him from behaving the way he was with alcohol.
And I would imagine too, I mean, I could be wrong about this, but did you find that work was in some way a sanctuary away from home from that kind of environment?
Yes, definitely it was. I couldn't say, though, that my work was not always affected by what was going on at home. So it was a distraction and something to get me away from that. But there were a few years when I was just at home with 2 little children. I went back to work part-time when they were still quite young, but it was quite often on my mind at work as well, so my work was affected as well.
Did it change the relationship over time? Was it a gradual kind of change?
Yes, it was, because the disease of alcoholism in my husband progressed. Yeah, so the relationship changed along with the progression of the disease.
What did the relationship look like when you first started, to say when it was like at its peak of the alcoholism?
When it first started, we were both very young. We got married at very young. I was 21 and he was 22, and we had stars in our eyes and dreams of having that perfect life. It was okay for a while. It was fine, you know. We married. We had a home in Epping in Melbourne, and we had friends and social life and, you know, intimacy. All of that was fine. But as time went on and the disease progressed in him, that's all sort of started to fall apart.
Why do you think he turned to alcohol?
He turned to alcohol because I believe he was always going to. He's an alcoholic, and my understanding of it is it is a disease that it runs in families. His father had it, so I believe there's a genetic side to that. There wasn't, in his case, any major event or anything that triggered him to begin to drink in an unhealthy way. I just believe it was always there in him, and it just progressed. So, yeah, there was nothing really, like I said, there was nothing in the beginning that made him seem any different to anybody else in our social circle. But as time went on, it was obvious that there was a problem.
Did it in any way affect your own consumption of alcohol? Did you find that you were drinking more when you were around him, or?
No, I guess there was a time in the beginning when probably I drank with him to be social, but as time went on, I didn't do that anymore. I still enjoy a drink, but I didn't ever do that. I just, and then of course I had the children. So if we were out anywhere together and there was lots of drinking going on, I wouldn't drink because I knew I'd be the one that would have to get up in the morning and look after the kids. So I just didn't do it. I never had a feeling that I needed to drink like that. So, and I believe that's because I'm not an alcoholic and he was, yeah.
Did your partner ever try to conceal the alcohol addiction?
He tried to deny it in the beginning, so he wouldn't ever consider that he was any different to any of his mates, and probably on the surface it didn't look that way either. It's just that at home his behaviour was different. But as time went on, the only real time that he tried to conceal his drinking was many years down the track when he did actually admit that he had a problem, and he went into a detox in a hospital when he came home, and he was supposed to be going to AA meetings and he was not. He was concealing drink then and trying to cover up the smell of it on him and all of that sort of thing. But up until that point of time, he didn't really conceal it.
At first, did you find it hard to admit to yourself that he had a problem with drinking?
I didn't want to admit that, but it was pretty obvious to me that he did as time went on. I didn't want to admit that. I did what a lot of other people do, is that I tried to make his life really easy and comfortable and do everything that he wanted from me, and in order to hopefully, make him happy so he wouldn't drink. So that was that, yeah. And I did other things too to try and control his drinking. But, as time went on, and especially after I came to Al-Anon, I realised that I didn't cause him, because I went through a lot of guilt about that too, maybe that, I wasn't good enough, so maybe this is why he drank. But I learned as time went on that it's not so, that I didn't cause this. I can't control it, and I certainly can't cure it.
For you, why do you think it was hard for you to admit that he had that problem?
I think it was shame. A lot of it was about shame and guilt, that I thought it was my responsibility to keep this marriage going and have a happy life and make everything great for all of us, and I couldn't do that.
You mentioned earlier that you had some strategies of trying to limit his drinking. How did you go about that?
I really wasn't able to do that in the beginning. I guess as time went on, I tried to do that, but it was basically just trying to talk him out of going to events or doing things that involved alcohol, trying to convince him that, he could just have one drink today and not 10. But I never really tried to hide alcohol from him. He hid it from me down the track, but I never tried to do that. But I know that there are people who have done that, have tried to hide alcohol, have tipped it down the sink. But my knowledge that I've learned over the years about that is that if an alcoholic wants to drink, they'll find a way.
Mm. How much a part was alcohol of his life? Was it all consuming, or did he have time for other things, or was he pretty consumed by alcohol?
In the beginning, no. He had great job, full-time job. We had a lovely house. He obviously was able to look after his family. It was just as time went on, because the disease progresses, that it becomes more and more difficult to sustain a normal life. But in the beginning, no, he was able to do all of that, and that went on for quite some time, until the last few years, actually, of Yeah.
How did it affect his relationships with the kids?
Yeah, I really think that they probably didn't notice that much in the early years. I really think, looking back, that it was probably more my behaviour that the kids were affected by than his. So they could see, because I was so focused on him and getting him to stop drinking, that I really did neglect not their physical needs, but certainly wasn't always there for them on an emotional level.
You're listening to Wellbeing, where we're discussing the experiences of being close to someone with an alcohol use disorder. My guest today is Elizabeth, the former wife of an alcoholic. Did your partner ever forgo things once the addiction kind of took over a bit more? Did he forgo, like, say, family time or any of, like, work responsibilities? Was that ever something that happened?
That happened as time went on, yes, because he'd go out and he would get very drunk and he would not be able to go to work the next day because he'd be hungover. And what I would do is ring up his workplace and make an excuse for him not coming. He would ask me to do that and I would do that. So there was that. And family gatherings that it became in the beginning, he was pretty much able, at times like Christmas, for example, he would stay sober on Christmas Day when the family was around. But as time went on, he wasn't able to sustain that anymore either. So it became more and more difficult for him to hide what was happening.
Was the addiction financially crippling at all, or did it never get to that kind of state?
It wasn't for a number of years. He was actually very good at managing money, finances, and he always had good jobs. But in the last few years, he wasn't able to. He made some really poor financial decisions, and he left his job and tried to take up another like a business of his own, and he wasn't able to do that. And that became more obvious as time went on.
What was your journey to reaching out, to getting help?
Okay, so we came to Port Macquarie in 1980, I think. So with two little children, and I guess in Melbourne, I had a little community in the suburb where I lived, and there was lots of support there. And when we came up here, I'd lost that. Felt quite isolated. So his drinking was obviously getting worse, and the effects at home were like it was chaos, really. And I went to my doctor, and I didn't go with the intention of saying anything about that. I went with some minor complaint and ended up telling him that, I wasn't, what was happening at home. And his initial advice was that I needed to take those two children and leave. And then he had second thoughts about that, and he would ask me if I'd go and speak to a counsellor who was a friend of his. And I knew this woman too, sort of. So so I went and saw her, and she suggested that I go to Al-Anon. And she gave me some pamphlets and said, I'd like, I think it'd be good for you to go. And I didn't for a number of weeks. I kept going back to her with lots of excuses about why I couldn't go. I had my daughter was in preschool. The meeting was on a Friday morning, and my daughter was in preschool on a Friday morning, but I had the other little one who was a baby, and I kept saying, well, I can't go because I've got this baby. And she eventually helped me find a babysitter. She was quite persistent, really, in saying this, this is what you need. And so that's how I ended up going. So it was these Friday morning meetings, and that suited me because I was afraid that my husband would know that I was going, and he was at work, so I could go to those meetings. So yes, that's how I ended up coming along.
Was there many supports in that time? I think you mentioned it was the 80s. Was there much support for the family members affected at that point in time?
I don't think there wasn't as much as there is today, for sure. As far as women in situations of domestic violence and things like that, there wasn't the support back then. I also had I had reached out to my parents, and I hadn't received the support from them. They weren't living here. They were still, yes, they were living in Port Macquarie, but their feeling was that it was up to me to sort this out, to make this work. And they weren't really supportive of me at that time when I first went into Al-Anon, no.
What kind of supports are in an Al-Anon? You mentioned the meetings there. What was the kind of... What would you discuss at meetings?
So when I first went to Al-Anon, the Al-Anon meeting, my thoughts were that I would find out from these people how I could stop my husband from drinking, because I believed that was the answer to our situation. But when I went along, what I found initially was a group of people, mainly women in similar situations to mine. That's changed now. The demographic has changed a lot, but back then it was mainly wives or partners of alcoholic husbands. So I identified, they just told their stories, and I identified with that. So it felt like a safe place to be able to talk about what was going on at home. And there was also their standard of anonymity. So I was assured that nothing that was said there would go any further. And if anyone saw me there that knew me, they wouldn't talk about me outside. So I was pretty, it was nice, and they were, warm and welcoming, and that's what kept me coming back in the beginning. Initially, they just suggested that I just keep coming back and try and keep an open mind and listen to their stories. And some of them gave me some little hints and tips about how I could handle things at home that would make things more comfortable for me and the children. So that was initially why I kept coming.
Is the way Australia views alcohol culturally a healthy view?
Oh, that to me is an outside issue. But if you want my personal opinion, look, I don't really know. I don't have an opinion on that. And as far as Al-Anon goes, we don't sort of talk about anything that's political or any outside issues. It's just from, our own experience and our own program. So I don't really know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you find that you were able to kind of manage the relationship with your partner a bit better after going to those meetings?
I don't think it was about managing. What Al-Anon teaches is that we focus on ourselves and our own behaviour, our own responses, our own attitudes. So I was able to make some changes by doing that. So that meant sometimes, even though I didn't feel it, like treating him with courtesy and respect, regardless of how he was behaving, not engaging with him in an argument when he was intoxicated. Things like that was what I was able to bring some sort of, peace.
What was your partner's experience with recovery? You mentioned a little bit about it before. Did they ever kind of go back, and were they ever successful in recovery?
No, my husband was not. He had a few times that he went into detoxes, and he was never able to sustain any long-term sobriety. He went to AA a few times, but he was never able to. The disease just continued to progress in him, and he actually died from that disease in 2015. And he was he was 62, I think, and he was in an aged care facility. So, I mean, it's not, my story doesn't have a happy ending in that sense, but for me, Al-Anon has given me a really happy life and a great life, and also meant that I've been able to sustain a good relationship with my children.
You're listening to Wellbeing, where we're discussing the experiences of being close to someone with an alcohol use disorder. My guest today is Elizabeth, the former wife of an alcoholic. And I guess that's why it's so important that even though he's mentioned there that it didn't have a good ending, but I think it's still important we talk about it because it's something that's such a. I don't think we probably hear enough from the families themselves.
That's right. We hear a lot about Alcoholics Anonymous, and everyone seems to know about that. And there's thousands of families and friends and co-workers and just people who have relationships of one sort or another with an alcoholic. There's also a lot of people who are adult children, what we call adult children of alcoholics. So there's many, many of them, and Al-Anon's it's definitely not as widely known about as we would like it to be. Yeah.
Did you find that when he did go in those moments of recovery that there was a small fraction of peace for that time, or was there any change for even a small amount of time, or was it pretty much the same?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that. The times were so short that he didn't actually embark on any sort of recovery. He was sober, but really it was I didn't trust him. I didn't trust that he would stay sober. So I think I was, really concerned about him and checking up to see if he was going to AA meetings and looking for alcohol in the house and stuff like that. So it was more about my behaviour during that time than his, but he wasn't able to sustain sobriety for very long, and he certainly didn't get into any sort of recovery program for long enough to make any difference. This is something that just is a lifetime thing.
What would have been different about your life if he had been successful in the recovery, do you think?
Well, I don't know. If we'd both been in a program, him in AA and myself in Al-Anon, we would have had that common focus of living our lives as per the principles of those programs, which are pretty much the same. So, yes, I mean, I can't project, I can't know what would have happened, but I could see that if he had become sober, that then we would have had certainly more of a chance of, having a better life together. Yeah.
Does society need to understand addiction a bit better than what it currently does? Because it seems like there's a lot of stigma around it.
Well, there's certainly still a lot of stigma around it. I think, well, for me, the stigma was about shame, not living with this, not being able to do anything about it, and knowing that if my husband was out and about and intoxicated in public, and what people may think about me as being his wife and not being able to do anything about this, or not being able to control him, feeling that I was being blamed for it.
Seems, though, in a lot of ways too, that kind of cultural kind of look upon it, as far as being a family member goes, it's kind of shifted from that kind of, well, it's kind of your job to sort it out, to kind of, well, there's a lot. It seems like the culture is a lot more helpful now than what it was, say, then.
Well, I don't know that it's changed that much. I just all I know is that in Al-Anon, I've just learned about the fact that alcoholism is a disease, the same as diabetes or cancer, that the person who has it doesn't want it, didn't ask for it. There's something in Al-Anon that we learn called detachment, which is to try to detach the disease from the person, try to remember who that person was or is, apart from the disease. With my husband, it was a lot of Jekyll and Hyde. He could be, and the person that I saw him as in the community, the hard-working person who was respected in the community, is the person that he was. And the person that he was when he was home, that was alcoholism. So I was able to do that and remember that this is not him, this is a disease. and just working those 12 steps. It's a 12-step program, same as, well, it's not the same as, we're not the same organisation as AA, but we came from AA. And the steps are pretty much the same as they use. So, and I didn't get into the steps for quite some time because I just wasn't ready. And that's the other thing about Al-Anon. There's no program that you have to do this week and this next week. It's a lifetime thing and you take it at your own pace. But certainly since, working those steps, I've been able to make a lot of change in my own life and also use this program in my relationships with everybody.
What would be the take-home from this interview you'd want people to remember the most?
Just if they're living in a situation with an alcoholic or they've been affected by somebody else's drinking, that there is a program, and Al-Anon is available for them and offers hope. I think that's the big thing. It does offer hope for them and hope for their families and hope for their relatives as well. And just to try it, give it a go, and just be open-minded about it. It can be confronting when you first come along, but if you can just hang in there and just take it a day at a time and give it a chance. Al-Anon is a life-changing program, and it's specifically for the families and friends of alcoholics, and there's nothing else really like that. It's a 12-step program, and just give it a go.
Well, thank you for taking the time to talk with us today. Appreciate you taking the time.
Okay, thank you, Jack.
My guest today was Elizabeth, the former partner of someone affected by an alcohol use disorder. Thank you for listening. I'm Jack Hodgins, and all of us at Wellbeing wish you well.